So I'm going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here for Broadview's National Online Reading Club. My name is Emma Prestwich, and I'm Broadview's digital editor. Working behind the scenes to help me out tonight is Robert Lewanag, who is Broadview's associate editor. Robert, do you want to wave? We're so glad that you've taken an hour out of your evening to be here with us. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, the original owners and custodians of this land. Today, Toronto is home to many, including a diverse urban Indigenous community of Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. We would love to know who you are and where you're from. So please say hello from your hometown in the chat space. If you're part of a faith community and want to add that too, please do so. And if you want to add your own land acknowledgement from wherever you are, I invite you to share that as well. So a few little notes before we get started. I want you to know that we're recording this session so we can share this event with others later on. If you feel uncomfortable for whatever reason with your thumbnail video appearing on the recording, please turn off your video now. And please mute your audio during the event, or we may mute it for you. But do turn on the chat function. So if you haven't used the chat function before, you just hover your cursor over the bottom of the screen, and then you'll see a chat button that you can click on. This evening, we're going to hear from Dorothy Ellen Palmer, Bri-anne Swan, Carol Moskot, and Lincoln Agnew, all of whom were featured in or contributed to the January-February 2023 issue of Broadview. And one final note, after our speakers have told us a bit about themselves, there will be a time to ask some questions. Robert will post these instructions in the chat space, and I have some questions too, but this is really your time. And we'll have a more vibrant conversation if there's lots of participation. There are two ways to ask a question. You can type, I have a question into the chat, and then I'll call on you, and then switch on your audio. That's the one time to unmute yourself and ask your question, or just type the question into the chat and I will ask the guest for you. So let's get started. Our first guest is Dorothy Ellen Palmer. Dorothy is a writer who has written about a variety of different topics for Broadview. In her latest story for our magazine, she writes about learning about her half-brother Don through a DNA site and how their lives diverged after they were born. Please welcome Dorothy.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for coming here tonight. Thank you to everyone at Broadview for sharing my story about my brother. And I think I'd like to start with a very brief image description for those of you who might appreciate it. I'm a senior disabled woman with silver hair and glasses. I'm sitting in my living room with various artwork that I've made behind me, and have a big smile on my face because I'm thrilled to be here with you. My story, I think, can be summarized by something I saw online last week that made me laugh. It said, when you're doing family research, be prepared for the good, the bad, the ugly, and the unbelievable. And I think my story certainly proved all of those things. There were some wonderful good things coming out of the lifelong search for my family. About a decade ago, I found my birth mother and was able to meet with her once before she died. I also found my brother Don and his extended family. I discovered him through ancestry DNA testing, and we discovered one very unbelievable thing, that we were born a week apart. I'll explain that a little more in a minute. Another good thing that I found is at the age of 65, I found a 75-year-old uncle. Not too many people get to find that. And he's a cattle farmer out in Lethbridge, Alberta, which is really exciting. He and his wife, Barb, have been lovely to me. One of the other things I found, which was a little bit bad, unfortunately, was Dawn and I found another half-sister, Denise, same father, again, different mother. She's 5 years older than us, and she lives in a care home because she lives with dementia and has never been told us about us because she wouldn't understand. We understand from her husband that she lived a wonderfully full life as a social worker, which is the same field of work as my daughter, which is kind of interesting as well. the good, the bad, the ugly, and the unbelievable. I think the bad is the waiting, the bad is the wondering, the bad is the uncertainty, and that all of the news that we did get, even though it resulted in varying levels of acceptance in our new families, it's always better to know than not to know. So I'm not going to call the knowledge bad. The things we've learned, even though they were difficult, were the kinds of things any family could go through, and every family does. There were a couple of ugly things, I think, that there was the shame that I carried as a child. There was the sense that as a disabled adoptee, I really was doubly different, and it was very hard for me to overcome that. But finding family really helped a lot. I also think there were things in my story which were difficult. When Dawn and I discovered we were born a week apart, it was because our birth father impregnated 2 women within a week. I know that in my case, my birth mother divulged to me that it was not consensual on her part. So that's a very difficult thing to live with, but I would rather have the truth than have the worry and the wonder and the uncertainty. I guess the unbelievable things, there's some extraordinary coincidences that make you wonder about nature versus nurture. Dawn and I both were adopted into 2 families that had 2 adopted siblings and 2 unadopted siblings. Very strange coincidence. We both had 2 kids. We raised them in families with Springer Spaniels, the exact same kind of dog. Very strange coincidence. When our cousin on Ancestry contacted us, he was born in St. Michael's Hospital, the same hospital Dawn and I were born into a week apart. Our cousin was born there 2 months earlier. Our cousin also told us that he and I both have a son named Connor. And it turns out that Connor is his grandmother's last name. I, of course, had no way of knowing that when I picked the name Connor for my son. But it's so strange that my cousin and I, born 2 months apart, have a son named Connor, which is a family name that we didn't know. The last really interesting coincidence I'll share with you is that I went to the University of Western Ontario, as it was then called, and I realized it was half an hour from the McLean family farm, my birth mother's family farm, where 7 generations of Scottish Canadians had farmed. I've since visited their graveside and realized that 2 of my very best friends drove right past the family farm and the graveside every day to get to Western. I had visited their homes. I had driven past that farm, past the graveside, and never known it. Both of them must have grown up and gone to school with my relatives. And of course, none of us knew it. So that's a fascinating, really Reader's Digest condensed version of the kinds of things that you'll see in the article. And I guess if I could leave any advice for anyone wanting to do their own family history, be prepared for the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. That is a wonderful coincidence that you drove by that farm and had no idea. That's lovely. When several years ago, when you submitted your DNA to ancestry.ca, did you have any ideas about what you hoped might happen?
I think you dream about all kinds of things as a child. In fact, in my previous book, When Fenelon Falls, I put all my dreams in there. I dreamed my mother was the Queen of England. I dreamed my father was John F. Kennedy. I mean, there were all kinds of hopes that you have as a child. When you get a little bit older and reality sinks in, I really just wanted to find people related to me. I wanted to know the stories. I wanted to know where I came from. I wanted to know who my people were. And I think I was more than satisfied in finding all that out. But of course, I am prepared for a new surprise any day. There could be more at any time.
Thank you. So I want to leave some time for other folks to ask questions if they have them. So while you think of them or have a chance to type them in the chat, Dorothy, I wanted to ask you, your memoir you published in 2019, how did you find the process of writing about your past and present this time around?
Hmm. In 2019, my adoptive parents were both dead, and I had already found a number of my family. I had gone and met my mother. I think I was at the stage where I was reconciled enough to write about it. There were still some very difficult things to write about my birth father that I still struggle with how much is fair to write about, when we still are hoping someday that his 3 children might contact us, because we have 3 other half brothers and sisters out there through our birth father that we would love to hear from at some point in time. So it was a struggle to be fair to saying, I carry no shame. I'm not shameful. Dawn and I are well worth knowing, but at the same time to be a little bit careful that our family story is also other people's stories. So what do we have the right ethically to share in a way that will be helpful and not hurtful?
There's definitely some complex ethical questions there, I think, because in delving into your own story, there are other people who may be in different places about whether they want that shared or not. In the process of writing your story for Broadview, were those questions that came up for you about whose story could I share, whose story should I? Were there folks you consulted in that process?
Absolutely. That was one of the best things about writing this story, is that I didn't write it alone. Don, my half brother, and his wife Anne, and I consulted a lot about the details about Don's mother, Anna, who was from Chile, and what kinds of things he wanted divulged about her. And we conferred together about what kinds of things we wanted divulged about our birth family. So it was a wonderful process to be able to not do it alone, to actually be writing about family with family.
Your story is a wonderful one and a complex one, and thank you so much again for sharing it with us. It's also one, this is the kind of story that is coming to light more and more as more people find out about relatives they wouldn't have known about otherwise. Are there resources that you wish were available for you as someone who was learning more about your biological family? A support group or people to consult? Are there things you wish you had as you were going through this journey?
I guess this journey is split into pre-internet and post-internet. Pre-internet, when I was in my teens and early 20s, I joined a group called Parent Finders, and it was like trying to find the haystack, forget about the needle in the haystack. Pre-internet, it was virtually impossible to do any genealogical research. All adoption records were closed at that point in time, until about 10 years ago. And with the internet, there's been this explosion of resources. So if you just type in adoption search support groups, you will get every kind under the sun that you want for every kind of marginalized group focus that you might want. It's really quite wonderful what's available now in the internet. I guess I just wish I'd had the internet when I was 18. That would be my one big wish, that it was, a real travesty of justice that I had to be told I was shameful until I was 67. And then I had to hunt down everything about myself that it wasn't immediately available. That is the only regret I have, that it took so long, and that there would be so many generations of adopted people like me pre-internet who would never know and died not knowing. I think that's, I think about those people all the time, that my journey represents a success that they couldn't achieve, that they were forbidden to achieve. And I'm in their debt, because them speaking out about their situation made it possible eventually for legislation to change, for future people like me and my brother Don to succeed in finding our family.
Have there been any updates since we published the story? Are there family members you've connected with, or things that weren't able to be included?
A genetic genealogist named Jane Mukovich did a extensive genealogy for Don and I. It goes way back to our great-great-grandparents. And also I keep getting almost every day I'm on 3 or 4 different sites. So Heritage DNA almost every day I get a new relative. I got one today from Australia. Now it'll be a third to a fifth cousin. We'll have a great great grandparent in common. You know, we're not an immediate relative. There have been no changes there, but there have been this huge extended diaspora, which represents sort of where all of the McLeans and the Scots ended up, and where all of my birth father's family that was from Scotland and England all ended up. And it's quite literally all over the world. And I keep getting updates on all of those people all the time.
Some comments in the chat from folks who are pursuing this journey, have connected with family members. Sharon says she has a full sister who was given up for adoption when her mom was 15, who contacted us a few years ago. Sadly, she is gone, but we had 12 wonderful years. That's lovely. And Saida, who I think sent the message to me, but I think intended it for you, Dorothy, for everyone, says they're awaiting their DNA test kit and says that you are inspiring.
Oh, thank you. It's all of us are inspiring together.
Were there details that didn't get included in the story, not because of your own judgment about whether to include them or not, but things that you might have wanted to share that were just cut for space or for theming?
One of the things that astounded me was another coincidence. My birth mother and my mother who raised me were 10 years apart, but they went to the same elementary school, Swansea Public. And they both, when my birth mother wrote her memoir, the childhood that she described, growing up in that area of Swansea, going to Sunnyside Amusement Park, going to the Santa Claus Parade, was exactly my mother's childhood. It was so strange and so eerie to think that they would have been in the same elementary school, but of course never met because it was 10 years apart. So that was another just extraordinary coincidence that I still shake my head when I think about it.
Oh, absolutely. And in big cities, the number of people that you can pass without even knowing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions that folks have for Dorothy, or comments just about your own personal experience or what you experienced while reading the story? Okay, thank you for your lovely comments. It feels like this is a relatable experience for many people. And thank you so much for sharing with us so openly and so articulately.
I'm thrilled to be here, and I encourage everyone to take up that journey. And my brother Don and I are thrilled that we did.
Thank you so much. So another person who's gone on a complex journey and has been willing to share it with us is Bri-anne Swan. Bri-anne is the Minister of Digital Community, Growth and Public Witness at Jubilee United in Toronto. In our latest issue, she spoke with David Wilson about being a spiritual advisor to death row inmate Ramiro Gonzalez. Please join me in welcoming Bri-anne.
Thanks, Emma. And it's been so cool to sort of go through and see who's here and what churches they're from, because it's like, oh, I've sang there, I've preached there. Special shout out to Ralph Connor and Canmore. That was really cool to see. But so I didn't understand until last week that I was supposed to come with something prepared to say. David Wilson already did a really great job with a lot of words in presenting our story and Bridget's story as well, as much as it was possible. And so I was wondering, like, what more could I share with you? But luckily, Emma was very helpful with some prompts. So one of the questions Emma suggested we could talk about was, could you expand on any of the themes from the article? And if there was one theme that I would want to expand on, it's the idea that compassion is not a finite resource, that love begets love. I get a lot of angry emails, angry messages, and one of the themes of those messages is how could I befriend Ramiro, because it did start out as a friendship after knowing what he did. Like, don't I care about his victim? And the thing is, I really do grieve Bridget's death. And one of the things that I really appreciated about working with David on this article for what feels like a lot of years now is that David was always very concerned about telling Bridget's story as best he could, because she's not just a plot point or a plot vehicle to tell this beautiful story about redemption. You know, she was a real person with a life, and she loved and was loved, and she deserves to be treated as that. And one of the critiques I have of a lot of the articles that have come out about Romero, as especially when they discuss his wanting to donate a kidney, is that she's kind of just glossed over, that it's not really acknowledged that this was a massive loss that has left, you know, a huge hole in her family, which has been sort of patched over with a lot of angerness and bitterness. And it's really unfortunate. And so caring for people who have done terrible things, it's not only for their own benefit. It is in everybody's best interest that people are dealt with in compassion, because love begets love. And one of the things is that most people who are incarcerated will be released at some point. Those on death row probably won't be, but most will. And so from a very practical level, it is in everybody's best interest that people who are going to be reintegrating into society have a sense of worth, have job skills, have had therapy to work through their issues and stuff. So just practically, it's really important that people are dealt with compassion. But even outside of that, I think it comes down to what kind of world do we want to live in? One that manifests love, or one that only creates more and more and more pain? Because I not a Pollyanna type of love, because that's saccharine and doesn't really help anything, but, and it's why it's hard, because that kind of love is really, really difficult. Yes, but the only thing I know is that killing another human being who's been locked up for 10, 15, 20 years literally does not serve anybody well. It does not help a single thing. So that would be one of the themes that I would really want to emphasize from the article. Another question was, what has happened since the story was written? And Texas has killed 4 men since Romero received his stay. He was the last stay that the state of Texas granted. Everyone else who was scheduled for 2022 was in fact executed. There's an execution scheduled for tomorrow. So this is happening. One of those men who was executed, his name was Kusul. I was able to see him when I was in Texas this summer. And he was Romero's best friend. And Romero's had a lot of best friends, because he has a best friend and then they die. So this was his latest best friend, and he was executed in August. Romero's case has been sent back to the county court. If there's any specific questions about that process, I'm happy to answer them later as best I can. But we're expecting the judge to make a ruling about it at the county level relatively soon, at which point it will go back to the Criminal Court of Appeals for some more discussion and decision. And the final question that I think I'm going to respond to is from the list that Emma so helpfully offered, was whether we are working on a project right now that we're really excited about. And so I wrote a companion piece to David Wilson's article about capital punishment and the crucifixion, and why I think specifically Christians have a unique relationship to capital punishment. If that's a kind of conversation you like having, theological conversations about justice issues, I invite you to join us at Resistance Church, which is an online digital ministry I lead for Jubilee. You could search Resistance Church, or I can send you a link in the chat. It's entirely online, so it doesn't matter where you are. You could join us, and we would love to meet you and talk about issues like capital punishment and other justice issues more. And finally, I was able to speak with Romero on the phone last week, and I asked him if there was anything he wanted me to bring here to say to you tonight. So he sent me a letter, and these I'd like to leave with Romero's words. He says, "Before anything, I wish to thank Mr. Wilson and Broadview magazine immensely for articulating a well-constructed article. I stand in debt for their compassion, for their desire and curiosity in reaching within these prison walls and allowing me the opportunity to let my voice, my faith, and my person be heard. My hope is my goal, which is a reflection of my spiritual dream to strive in every way to continue to become and exceed my worst mistakes, and then in return to become instrumental in helping others see the transcendent worth in all humanity, the sacredness of every mortal being. Gandhi once stated that if we all lived by an eye for an eye, the entire world would be blind. How true and profound, I ask then, can we see or are we blind? Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Wilson and Broadview, for everything. Ramiro Felix Gonzalez."
Thank you, Bri-anne. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing Ramiro's letter with us. I think there are some questions. Kathy, do you want to ask your question? Kathy, are you here with us? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Awesome. Thank you.
Hi. Well, the first question I have is, you guys are located where? Your location?
I'm
Are you
in
in the States?
No,
no?
I'm in Toronto.
You're in Toronto. Okay, I thought so. I'm in the States. I'm in New Jersey, very, very close to New York, but I don't know if you guys are aware of the recent killing of 4 college students in Idaho.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with that?
A little bit.
A little bit. Okay, so there was a recent killing, and I think it was in late November, early December. 4 Idaho college students, someone came into, they were renting a house, and someone came into their house and killed 4 of them. It was more than 4 living there, but he only killed 4 of them, 3 girls and 1 boy. But he slashed, I believe, slashed their throat. There was no gun involved. This was all with a knife. And so my question, I guess, is when something like that happens, a killing, and he was unrelated, he didn't know any of them. They said, psychologists and things were saying he was just obsessed, almost like stalking one of the girls. But he also himself was a college student, if you can believe that or not. And he was studying criminology. He already obtained his master's degree, and he was working on his PhD. So I guess, my question would be, when something like this happens for no apparent reason, or we don't know the reason, how do you find, or where do you find a place in your heart or in your forgiveness to forgive somebody like this?
Yeah. So one of the things that I always make sure to remind folks that I'm talking to, and as much to remind myself, I only know the best of Ramiro. I came into Ramiro's life 10 years after he had been incarcerated. And so I acknowledge that it would have been much harder to enter into this sort of relationship with him had I met him when we were both 18, for example, when this crime had happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the places that I kind of go to is again, like, for who is benefiting from like a lot of people would say, like, isn't this a clear case that somebody deserves to die, you know? And I would say no, partly because of what it does to other people, like the people, because there's a whole bunch of people who participate in these executions and stuff. And I believe that that does something to you. There's no way you can go through watching somebody die and participating in it and that not move you in some way. But also, I think that, I mean, forced forgiveness is not helpful either. So I'm also bracketing that because I'm very aware of people who have been harmed by other people and the pressure to come up with forgiveness. But I think it comes down to, you know, it is, it doesn't long-term help, I think, you know, the world to completely turn our backs on people. And excuse me, part of that is that people rarely get to a place where they are, and I say rarely getting to a place where they're committing these type of crimes without having already fallen through an incredible number of cracks before something breaks and this violence happens like this. So.
Thank you, Kathy. Virginia has a question. Virginia, go ahead.
Hi. I was very moved by the article. I have been very fortunate to live in Canada for 55 years, but grew up in Iowa, which does not have the death penalty. My sister, who lives there now, said the two words that to her are most convincing for abolition of the death penalty are a name, David Milgaard. And of course, as a Winnipegger now, David was not the only unjustly convicted person who was jailed. Thomas Sofino, James Driscoll. I guess as a Canadian, I can't be smug that we don't have the death penalty, because we do have a record of wrongful convictions. And only the dedicated persistence of David's mother, Joyce, and David and his mother both died in the last few years, was David eventually released after over 20 years. Do you have any feelings about that issue? I mean, what you're doing is wonderful, but it seems to me we have work to do here on the issue of wrongful convictions.
Yeah, the issue of wrongful convictions, the issue of the sort of school to prison pipeline that often happens, as many people might have watched 13 on Netflix, which is about that sort of phenomenon in the United States that affects primarily Black individuals, the sort of that there was slavery, and then once slavery was abolished, then there started to be that prison became the new institution that perpetuated that kind of racism. In Canada, you know, we have an enormous number of Indigenous people, an enormously disproportionate number of Indigenous people who are incarcerated, a disproportionate number of Asian people who are incarcerated, a disproportionate number of Black people, and how those ratios play out is different in different parts of the country. And yes, we have our own record of wrongful convictions, David Milgaard, Guy Paul Moran, and they might have received a death sentence had we had that. So yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you that we have work to do on wrongful convictions, but also how people are ending up in prison in the first place.
Michael has a question. Michael, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Bri-anne, for sharing your insights on this really challenging and important topic. You've sort of noted that you've had some experience of the story and aspects of the situation through other forms of media, social media, other media outlets, no doubt. And I'm curious if sort of taking consideration all the different tellings of sort of this situation that you've seen, if you were to take a step back and gauge the overall kind of tenor or temperature of the situation, is there sort of a common read on that you can get, and does that tell us something about maybe progress that's been made on this issue in recent years, or sort of things that really still need to be worked on? Is it sort of a hopeful read, or is it distressing generally?
I think there's a both and at play. I think that the media that came out about Romero leading up to his execution, and there was a New York Times article that came out about the same time as the Broadview article was released, and that was partly because, his lawyers had reporters that they made sure got the stories first and stuff. It was all that was not orchestrated, but there were plans at play. But the media has been, particularly when it kind of came out that Romero was trying to donate a kidney, the media was really interested in telling that story. And I don't think they necessarily would have been even 7 or 8 years ago. I don't think they would have been as interested in that. So that was one thing. But in terms of how it is discussed on social media, I feel like it's become much angrier. And I think the comments about my relationship with Romero they've always been very misogynist, but I think that the degree has just intensified. But about Romero, I think the rhetoric has just become way more harsh. So it's interesting to see the difference in the media, the official media perspectives, but that social media has become just much, much angrier.
I think we have time for one more question. There's one from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, go ahead.
I hope I'm the Elizabeth. I think there may be more, but I'd be curious, Bri-anne, really appreciate what you've been saying. If you just to speak a little bit about the connection between compassion and forgiveness. Do we, is it possible to be compassionate without forgiving? I would argue yes, but I want to hear your take on it. And also, is it possible to hold people accountable for their actions and be compassionate? Can we find a way to hold both of those, or is accountability and compassion impossible to hold together?
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah. By the way, hi, nice to see you. I think that first, absolutely compassion and being held accountable can and should be, right? Because if you're not holding someone accountable, it can also be that you're just writing them off as not being worth investing in making and keeping them accountable, right? But keeping people accountable, you can't keep someone accountable if they're dead, in this particular context. And I think, no one's advocating that Romero, again, specifically in this context, be released. Romero wouldn't want to be released. He doesn't know how to function as an adult in this world now. The inmates in Texas just received tablets for the first time, and Romero sent me his very first email. Like, could you imagine only sending email for the first time now? So no one's advocating that he be released and that he remain accountable in the prison system, but the Texas prison system especially is absolutely horrific. He and his fellow inmates do not receive enough food. Like, he wrote me, and others have been writing, saying, we don't have enough food. Can you please buy commissary? So they're not asking for money. They're asking for food to be purchased on their behalf because they are hungry. There's no compassion in that. So yes, I think that people can be held accountable, but also be shown enough compassion that they're not starving. And can one be compassionate without forgiving? And I think, yes, for me, and I guess it depends on how one defines forgiveness, but to me, forgiveness has less of a process and more of a destination. Like there's a process towards forgiveness, but it feels like a state of being. Whereas compassion, I think, can be part of the process to get there. And you can have compassion and treat someone compassionately and respectfully without necessarily forgiving them. They're related, but not the same. And I think perhaps, yeah, you don't need to have forgiveness to have compassion, but I think you need to have compassion before you have forgiveness.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughtful questions. And thank you so much, Bri-anne, for your conviction, for your willingness to speak to so many aspects of this. You've clearly thought so carefully about it. Thank you so much for being here. There are a few more questions and comments. So if you'd like, if all of our guests would be willing to stick around for a few minutes after the event is over, there will probably be some more informal discussion time as well. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to exploring another aspect of this story, the visual element of it. We're going to be speaking with Lincoln Agnew and Carol Moskot. Lincoln is the illustrator who designed our January-February cover and illustrated David's story about Ramiro and Bri-anne. And Carol Moskot is Broadview's art director. She leads every aspect of the magazine's overall visual style, layout, and graphic design, including its brand identity and logo. During the event, she will talk about the process of working with Lincoln and designing this cover. Lincoln is a visual artist who lives and works in Vancouver. He has illustrated covers for the New Statesman, Sports Illustrated, and Billboard magazine. Welcome, Lincoln and Carol.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Hello, Carol.
Lincoln, hi. It's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too. We've talked a lot, but I've never with this technology. I'm in the dark over here. I don't get out much. I apologize. I'm in my dungeon, in my cage. Yeah. Anyway, here we go. Well, thank you so much. I mean, thanks so much for having us. It was an absolute pleasure to work on this project, and the story is so inspired. I work on a lot of editorial work for publications around the world, and this story in particular stuck out as, you know, this kind of like, you know, grassroots heartfelt message of redemption in his name, and it was a joy and a struggle to you know, work on. But I thank you so much for the opportunity. I have a little slideshow of sorts, a little presentation that I'd like to, you know, get into a little bit here, but I want to let Carol talk before. She has not seen this to know what's going to happen, and I hope it works, and, you know, we'll see how it goes, but, you know, I'll give you the floor for a moment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Lincoln, what a pleasure to meet you in person. Just so everyone knows, Lincoln and I have spent a lot of time talking on the phone. We've exchanged what feels like, no, I can't say hundreds of emails, but there were times where I think there were minute by minute exchanges. Anyways, to back up a couple of steps, you know, for those who have read Ramiro's story, when I received it and I read it, I felt this is a really complex story, and it's a challenging one from an ethical standpoint in view of what Ramiro's been facing. This is a story from Ramiro's tightrope walk to and from death row, but it's also the story of Minister Reverend Bri-anne Swan, who opposes the death penalty and has been working around the clock to ensure that Ramiro remains in jail but doesn't die by lethal injection. So this is a story of their connection, the ethics around the death penalty by a person of faith who sees that spiritual redemption is possible, especially in Ramiro's case. So I was looking for an illustrator who could tell Ramiro's and Bri-anne's story and reflect the real life participants in their coming together. And there are so many styles of illustration that I could have used to approach this story, to tell this story. And I thought photo collage is so perfect for this because we want to identify with Romero. We want to connect with a face. We want to connect with Bri-anne. And by bringing together elements of the story and with collage and photography, I felt that it would be a really fresh and unique approach. And I love Lincoln's bold kind of poster concept. He's got a bold poster style conceptual approach. There's a lot of grit and texture, just like the story has so much grit and texture and layers. And I felt that Lincoln's work could kind of convey those depths and the underlying facts of the story really, really well. So for the cover, I always write a creative brief to share my thoughts about the story. I give Lincoln a copy of the story. He reads the story. I share my thoughts. It was basically, there are not many shots of Romero or Bri-anne. Do your best to essentially communicate to our readers, who most of them, I assume, aren't on the fence about whether capital punishment is appropriate. We can count on our readers to be against it. But I kind of wanted Lincoln's work to stir a bit of righteous anger, that we still live in a society that condones state execution, and that there are people who are some really strong supporters in the United States, and I felt that Lincoln's work could stir people to action through how this kind of compelling, emotionally visual approach he would take would move forward. And before I let you speak, Lincoln, I just wanted people to know that we went through 37 rough versions of this illustration. Lincoln created 37 versions as he headed toward the final, which I think is brilliant, for the interior and the cover. So Lincoln, over to you, my friend.
Well, thanks. Good gracious. I'm flattered for the opportunity. It's a blessing, and thank you so much for being so patient and understanding and providing guidance and inspiration throughout the whole experience. And again, Bri-anne, thank you so much for your story. It's incredible. I look forward to hearing more and following you throughout all of this. So we're praying for you and all the things, and I'll just get into the creative process that we kind of dove into. And I haven't said this out loud much, so let's see if it works. I'm going to try to share my screen here. And
you should be good too.
Sorry, is this going to work? Is this working?
Yeah,
we can see it.
Okay, great. How do we go? Full screen mode. There we go. All right. This on? Yes.
Yes. I think it needs to be a bit more centered.
Oh, does it have to be centered? I centered it as best I could.
I don't think so.
Yeah, if we pull the little text, if we pull the little box to encompass the whole slide, I think we're just only seeing part of it.
Sorry, what? Is it not? It's not showing up proper?
Not.
I think you have to back out just a touch. You're at 54%. Make your screen a little bit smaller.
Okay, let's see. This is my nightmare. Welcome to it. Technical difficulties.
You're an illustrator and you're not a tech manager.
Yeah. Why can't I get the... So I'm going to go 100%. Let's go 50% there. Is that any better?
I think you need to share it again.
Oh my goodness, maybe I just shouldn't do it at all. That might be easier.
No, we'd love to see it.
Well, I'd love to show you. Can you see it here? Like this? Or is it still shifting off to the screen?
I think you just need to click on share screen first at the bottom of the screen, and then we'll be able to see it.
Sorry for my ineptitude.
No, not at all. There we go. Nice.
Is that working?
Yes.
Yes or no?
Yes, we just saw it. I think, but the screen has just gone dark.
Does it say creative process on there?
It did a moment ago.
Oh my goodness, a moment ago. I'm
Yes.
sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
There we go. You're good.
Okay, we'll just leave it like this. If this is how it is, and we'll just keep it like
Yes,
this.
we're
Forget
good.
it. Forget it. It's not going to. All right, we'll do what we can. Here we
Yes.
go. All right, so I'll introduce myself. I am an illustrator. I work with a lot of publications out of the States. I like simple, bold graphics that hit with the most minimum of elements. I like being able to impact a viewer quickly without having to, stare at the details to try to like figure it out. That doesn't always work out that way. This is some of my work that gets a little more complicated. It's an ongoing challenge to kind of figure out the puzzle pieces within the 2 or 3 day turnovers. Luckily, this project gave me a few weeks. But ultimately, the simpler, the better. It doesn't always work out that way. But that's what I was kind of aiming for this time around. And this was a piece that I did for the New Statesman for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. And this concept came up quite a bit, or this, piece came up quite a bit for its, eye contact with the viewer, kind of like the history surrounding her. And we wanted to do something similar in some way. So this was a palette I was kind of working with. These were the images that I had. And of course, the mugshot stood out in terms of the eye contact. And so I wanted to build around that. I also wanted to incorporate, the crucifixion, the concept in some way to hit hard. And so I drew up these roughs, in different ways of kind of incorporating the cross. I like the idea of it just like laying on top of his mugshot, so your eyes would bounce back and forth and you couldn't really see one way or the other. And then I like the idea of it, this kind of this cross in the form of the flag, the Texas flag, and Ramiro kind of over top of it. And then in the third concept, I'd like breaking up the mugshot to kind of form an invisible cross throughout these different sections that would highlight, life and death and, the eternal and the external. I didn't really know how that was going to work, but I like kind of the invisible cross within it. So I was quite excited about the first concept. I think I set it off, and I don't even know if I waited for a response because I was eager to see what it would look like. But I didn't have the proper crucifix, so I had to run out and buy a crucifix. I went to like 4 or 5 different places. I eventually got the crucifix out of a guy's trunk in an alley, but that's a different story. But I ran home and I just placed the cross on his face. And I thought that was it. This is like the impact and power that I wanted, because it's just, you just bounce back and forth. But it didn't work out. It didn't work out because, we want all the players included. We can't just, do that simple hit. We need to include, others. And so I went back and tried to figure out a thread that we can kind of create to connect the cover with the interior. And I thought of the idea of this kind of like this activist poster, and it would say "Save Ramiro," and then we could use this activist poster to use as a thread in different ways, whether there was somebody holding up or crowds of people holding it up or whatever that was. I just like the bold "Save Ramiro" idea. That eventually evolved into the interior, where we took these posters and started laying them out and then ripping them apart and trying to peel back, different elements. And so that eventually became the interior. And it took a while to get to this point. There's a lot of, I'm not going to show you all the steps in between, but the idea being that this activist this grassroots kind of, momentum is growing, and we're going to put all these posters up, and we're going to tear away, and we're going to reveal the people behind it. And how can that work now on the cover? And it wasn't working. It was a challenge to figure out what to do next. After we figure out the first one, we still have to do, the main cover. And how do you create something when you're so limited in the resources? I only had 2 pictures to work from. Both are not best of quality. And you have a story with such weight. And so, it was quite, challenging to keep working new ideas around the same elements. And in one of the lower points, as I was continuously trying to bang my head against the wall and figure it out, I thought of aligning talent with purpose, and how this is an opportunity to align talent with purpose in his name. And rather than thinking of the limitations, I want to think of the potential. And so as I started to think of the possibilities and I started to think of the potential, the idea popped in my head to just try the other picture. So this was the other picture I had, and I really didn't know what I was going to do with it. I barely spent any time looking at it at all, because I connected with that hard-hitting eye contact mugshot from the get-go, and I didn't look anywhere else for weeks straight, until I was essentially broken down with no other option. And I came back to this original picture. And as I was staring at it, I really didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just thought, well, maybe I could, take the phone out of the way and, maybe close his eyes or something. And as I started to cut it out, his head just seemed to just fall to grace, as opposed to this aggressive, activist kind of, message. It came one of grace and of peace and of calm. And, I cry when I think about it now, because as it was happening, as it was unfolding in front of me, tears are just rolling down my face, and this weight just kind of lifted, like I'd found the feeling in it. I'd found the feeling, and now I just have to build around it some way. So these were all the emails going back and forth. I just kept building new things. I didn't know. I was trying to add all the elements, trying to, figure out how we can conceptually move this around. And there's little protesters there, and I was, trying to figure out the surroundings, and thinking of the surroundings as kind of this containment. Like, how are we going to contain him, and how can we, get the other people involved in that containment? And I was constantly moving Bri-anne, closer and then further away, and, connecting or not connecting, and separating or not separating, or, how can we get, Bridget involved? How can she be a main part of it as well? So these characters, are unified. So, this ongoing process of adding in other elements, such as, the interior of the prison, or the exterior of the prison, or the woods, or, the color palette, was all in hopes of kind of creating this feeling of grace, of containment, of weight and redemption. And so this was ultimately the final piece. I'll show you a few things that were one of the most rewarding aspects. I love the idea that Bridget is the neck that essentially turns the head and bows it down. I love the light in the hands of eternity. I love Bri-anne kind of, cropped in like she's looking through a window or through the bars. And I love this guy here at the base of the hands, where it forms in prayer, and the exterior of the prison is on the right and the interior is on the left, and he's walking through it with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And those little details make it, what am I trying to say? The little details give it the redemption that I feel it deserved. And not everyone will see it, but for me, it was a moment of aligning talent with purpose. And so I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for having me, and thank you, Bri-anne and Ramiro and Bridget and Carol and everyone else for the opportunity. So that's that. Thank you.
I have goosebumps. I really do. That was brilliant. I loved seeing all the iterations and how they had evolved.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm weeping. I can't tell this story. I've told this story to lots of friends and family and all. I can't imagine being in it like Bri-anne, because I'm on the outside. I don't even leave this room and I'm tearing up, you know? Anyway, so thank you so much. It was a joy. It was a joy to work on. It was a highlight of my year.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that, for your frankness, for your willingness to let us in on your process, both visually and emotionally. Thank you both so much. Thank you all. Thank you, Dorothy, Bri-anne, Carol, and Lincoln. Thank you so much for your time, for willing to be so frank and articulate, and for volunteering your time. It really made this so wonderful. And thank you to all of you for being here. We're going to wrap it up for this evening. There may be some comments or questions that folks still have. So after we wrap it up formally, feel free to stick around. Tomorrow we'll be sending you a short survey by email, so you can send us your thoughts about this event. Broadview's Online Reading Club is a free event, but it costs us over $2,500 a year to host a group of this size. If you're already a donor to Broadview, thank you so much. Your donations help Broadview continue to feature exceptional people like Bri-anne and hire talented writers like Dorothy and artists like Lincoln. If you're not a donor, please consider making a small donation for tonight's event. Robert will post a link for donations in the chat, and will also include a donations link with tomorrow's survey. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Be well, and hope to see you back here in March when we'll chat about the March issue. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night and thank you.
Can Bridget stay around to address a few of the questions in the chat?
Bri-anne?
Bri-anne, yes.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, feel free. So this is, if folks have, it looked like you had a question. Was that you, Alan? Or whoever just mentioned, if you have a question, feel free to go ahead.
Yes, I had the question. In Canada, the life sentence is 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered what Bri-anne thought in conversation. You know, there's the issue of capital punishment, then there's the issue of life, quote unquote, imprisonment, and what your thoughts were on that.
So you're talking about life without the possibility of parole. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. With an openness to my heart and mind being changed, at this point in my life, I do not believe that life without the possibility of parole is ever a just sentence, which does not to me mean that 25 years should be, you make it to 25 and out. Like those, they're slightly separate. But I think the idea that somebody could be put in prison and no matter what, that is where they stay for the rest of their life. At this point in my spiritual journey, that's just not something I believe in.
If the execution is stayed, how long will Romero be in prison?
Romero will be in prison for the rest of his life, no matter what happens.
Okay. 25 years doesn't sound better.
Sorry, 25 years doesn't sound better than
life till you die.
I don't, for Romero at this point, I don't know if it would be, but it's not a possibility for him. He will never be released.
Right. Texas, right? Thank you.
Wanda, you had a question for Bri-anne. Wanda was wondering if Sister Helen Prejean had been involved at all in Romero's case.
No, not in this case. She's part of she leads a group that was certainly doing advocacy around it in the way that they do advocacy about a lot of different executions from all over the states, but she was not personally involved. And I'll also say, like, Romero's case is not a particularly high profile case. There's no question, there's no sort of guilt innocence question or anything like that. So as far as capital punishment inmates go, he's not a particularly high profile one in either Texas or the country.
There are other questions for our guests? Were there other stories from the January, February issue that you folks really enjoyed, that you have some thoughts or questions about?
Could I ask a question to Bri-anne quick? Is that possible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes. Hello, Bri-anne. It's Lincoln.
Hi, it's a real honor to meet you, Lincoln.
Oh, it's an honor to meet you. Good gracious. It's a blessing. I'm so proud to be a part of this. I talk about you all the time. It's amazing. And you know, I just want to give you all the credit in the world for stepping up to the challenge of being a spiritual leader in this space. And I'm wondering, you know, as a parent myself, how do you kind of separate life from responsibility in terms of just your daily, as your daily life requires your attention, as well as, you know, Ramiro down in Texas, and never mind everything else going on, you know?
Yeah. So that, I mean, it was when this journey started, I was pregnant and had a not even 2-year-old yet. And it was so much easier then. Now my youngest son is 8, my older son is 10. And it got really hard. It got really hard this summer because I had to go twice. I had to like actually leave the country twice. So there was that. But also they ask more questions and they know more. So they know who Romero is. They know that he killed somebody and the state of Texas wants to kill him. They know that. He sends them cards and stuff. He's seen them grow up because he has, I send him photos of them all the time. Mm-hmm. Like we are his family. Mm-hmm. And now that my older son is on the internet, there will be a time pretty soon where he does a Google search for my name, mm-hmm. and he's going to come across this stuff. And that's the thing that that really bothers me, is that one day he's going to see all these things that people post.
Do you not think that he'd be proud to see these things that you are?
I think he will be. I hope my children will one day be proud of me. Mm-hmm. I think I worry that upon first, I mean, I'm not talking about, the articles. I think I'm talking about people's responses to the articles. Mm-hmm. And so I do worry that will hurt them. Mm. But I also, try to raise my kids balancing awareness in an age appropriate way. And it's hard sometimes.
Mm. Well, I'm not aware of the comments, to be honest. Like, I would have nothing but praise for all the things. So, from my heart to yours, I just want to thank you for all the things that you are doing. It feels like I'm talking to like a cartoon character. I've stared at your picture for so long with the, the collar and all the things. Like, I can't, like, now your face is moving and it's amazing. So you're a real person. I just want to thank you for all the gifts that you are giving.
Well, I mean, thank you for the care that you took with the project, Lincoln. It's really beautiful. And Romero thought it was stunning.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you.
Before you head out, Dorothy, I just had a question for you. What kind of response have you received since the story was published? Have there been folks who have emailed you to let you know their stories? I know there were some people here who had their own personal stories. Has there been a response to your piece? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Go. Are we back? Okay. Yes, I've had a lot of people either on Facebook or on Twitter or in private messaging, get in touch with me. And adoption touches so many people. We often refer to it as an adoption triangle because on one point of the triangle is the adoptee, on the other is the birth family, and on the third is the adoptive family. And all three of those people, groups of people, are affected by adoption. So it's been lovely to see the response. And I know that my brother Don has gotten responses as well. I think it's fabulous that other people are energized by the possibilities of what we found and maybe made a little less afraid by what we found. Quite a number of people have said that it gives them courage, that if a story like mine can be faced and I'm still glad and grateful for that story, then it makes them less afraid for what they might encounter. So all of those things have been lovely, and thank you, Broadview, for being the vehicle to make that possible.
Susan and Mary just posted something in the chat. One response to your article from us is that we ordered your memoir from the publisher. Looking forward to reading it.
Even better. Thank you.
If there are any other comments or questions, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up for this evening. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.